After the Comey firing, Donald Trump has revealed he's a different kind of mother. This show is about the real ones. It's Mother's Day. Next on Emil Amok's Takeout. Hi, everyone, and welcome to what I call Emil Amok's Takeout. We serve it, you take it out. Forms the acronym EAT, and it is time to eat. My takes on all things about race, society, politics, and diversity, and everything those things touch in our culture and society, with respect to Asian Americans. And of course, you don't have to be Asian American to lend us your ears. It's your minds we want. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host, and you might say, why, Emil? Why Amok? Well, the short story is that for nearly 15 years, my Emil Amok column was a staple of AsianWeek, what was once the leading Asian American weekly in English in America. Amok was the name of my compilation of essays, and Amok is on my driver's license, not indicative of my mental state. And it's the name of my solo show. Its premiere at the San Diego International Fringe Festival, June 23rd through 28th. It'd be great to see you. And now, of course, the column is home-based on the website of the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund blog. That's at ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Check it out. And if you like what you see and hear, ALDEF is a 501c3. Go to the donate button. It's tax deductible. On this episode, it's all about Mom, my mom. Her name, Mom. I didn't call her by anything. Her name is Josefa, but, Mom. She's Mom. I wrote an essay about Mom for my book, Amok, the collection of my AsianWeek columns, which incidentally won an American Book Award in 2000, for which I'm very grateful. The essay was written in 1996, more than 20 years ago. So I'll read that. We'll talk about my mom, who really was a special woman. And this is how special she was. She survived the Japanese occupation of Manila during World War II and found her way to the U.S. after the war. It was because of an angel, really. A Spanish woman who I was introduced to and told to call her my Lola, which is, the term of endearment for grandmother. She was my Lola Angelita, but she was my mother's angel. So I shall honor all the Filipino comadres today, the comadres just like my mom, all that in our special Mother's Day show. But first, it's still Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and for its AAPI cover, I salute the New Yorker for its very funny cover, which features our friend. It's Dr. David Dow of United Airlines passenger drag fame. Only the New Yorker substituted fired FBI head James Comey for Dow, and they have Attorney General Jeff Sessions dragging Comey down the aisle. I mean, you could hear, although, Comey may not have been as loud. He was in L.A., when they did it. It was sort of backhanded, so it wasn't so audible. And there's Sessions dragging Comey down the aisle and the imperious Trump looking over his shoulder as the omnipotent leader of America. I mean, really, that's where America is right now. And you could substitute yourself for Comey being dragged away. So, unfortunately, before we talk about our mothers, we must talk a wee bit more about Donald Trump. Because here's one thing that can be said about Trump. Well, I guess the best thing this month is that he didn't forget to tweet out about Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. He did tweet that out. So we know he doesn't necessarily think he's above the law because he did cite Public Law 102-450, which is Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. That's the law. But he's not above the law. He's just not above the lie. And the lie of the moment in this administration that has questioned everything from inaugural crowd size to alleged wiretapping of Trump Tower. The question now is why Trump fired Comey. Was it the Clinton emails? I mean, for a while, that's what his press secretary and everyone else was saying. Trump's letter said so much with the Assistant AG Rod Rosenstein's memo, which was written op-ed-like to say as much, that there was something wrong with Comey's investigation. See, it wasn't about Russia, right? But then Trump told Lester Holt of NBC the very next day that Comey was a showboat and a grandstander, Trump's words, and that Trump was going to fire Comey all along, regardless of the recommendations. See, it wasn't about the emails. Definitely about the Russian investigation, which Comey was seeking to escalate by asking for more funds just before his firing. The president just can't keep his lies straight. And of course, the real problem is you don't fire the person investigating you unless you want to be seen as the second coming of Nixon, which I pointed out on the ALDF blog earlier this week at aaldf.org/blog. I mean, the Nixonian images were pretty thick. I mean, there was the firing, which was like the Saturday Night Massacre of Archibald Cox, the special prosecutor. And then Trump's very first words about the firing were in the Oval Office while sitting next to Henry Kissinger, Nixon's Secretary of State. So either Trump is tone deaf politically, or he acts like a man who just doesn't care, because to him being president is king. He's unchecked, he's omnipotent, and can do no wrong. I mean, surely there are observers who feel, well, look, it's just Trump being Trump. He'll come to his senses. It's just a Nixonian coincidence. But what do you know? The Twitter king took it to a new level when Friday morning he tweets that James Comey, quote, better hope there are no tapes of our conversations before he starts leaking to the press. The implication, even more Nixon-y. I mean, tapes? Nixon had tapes. Trump has tapes? Or was he just threatening Comey, in an offhanded way? And then another tweet where Trump even questions whether or not he should have press conferences. Because, as he says, quote, as a very active president with lots of things happening, it is not possible for my surrogates to stand at podium with perfect accuracy. Maybe that was just a Mother's Day gift to Sarah Huckabee Sanders for what she had to do to lie for the president. Because right now, we have the lying president in the truth-optional White House. Well, the American public better be concerned because this is not the way it works in a democracy. It's also sad because he's making Philippine President Duterte look like the angel of democracy. I also write for the Inquirer.net, which is based in the Philippines and, worldwide to Filipino communities all over. But really, I like to compare Trump with Duterte, and it looked like they were neck and neck before. You might say, oh, well, Duterte has 8,000 deaths on his hands from those extrajudicial killings, allegedly. But Trump's he wants to lop off $24 million from healthcare. So I think Trump's way ahead. And with this Comey thing, I don't know. I think Trump is in the lead. You just don't expect the leader of the free world to have a problem with truth and credibility. And then to be played by Putin, the very next day, by staging a meeting in the White House with the Soviet diplomats for photo ops and shutting out the Western press, and then taking the pictures from the Soviet news agency TASS. I mean, what's going on here? We've got a reality show stooge for president. Is that it? I mean, that's better than saying liar, right? I mean, but it's painful, no matter what your party loyalties. Thank goodness for Mother's Day. So now, here's my essay on Mother's Day and my storytelling about my own mom. Her name was Mom. We're going to get rid of the music here and just talk dry because it may not be dry for long because it's our Mother's Day edition and we honor our moms. And I figured it's time to honor my mom personally. You know, I'm going to read an essay I wrote about my mother in my book, Amok, Essays from an Asian American Perspective. It's a collection of my early AsianWeek columns from the 90s, and it was published in 2000 and won an American Book Award, which I'm very grateful and very thankful for. But it has this one essay, and I'll share that with you. You know, it's something about my mother, and I've always felt that was a private thing. Although I guess it was very public because I was always more with my mom out in public when I was a small boy, and Mom was always the public one, not my dad. But yet I always kept talking about my dad in public when I talked about being Asian American or Filipino American, because there was something about his story that I felt was slightly more compelling because, well, he came here first. And then as I thought about that, I thought, well, that's not true. My mom was pretty special too. Filipinas were a rare thing in the U.S. at the time of my father's immigration. I say immigration, I guess he migrated because he came without a green card. He was an American national. He was born under the American flag when the Philippines was a colony in 1906. So when he was ready to come to America, he was neither slave nor, immigrant, really. He was an American national who required no green card. He was coming to the U.S. And men were given that option much more readily because they were a workforce. They came to the United States to work in 1928, and generally that meant the fields or in some kind of service trade. And women just didn't come at that time. I mean, for a variety of reasons, but primarily that. And then also because maybe of the kind of the sexist ways that were present back then. Although, when people think of the Philippines, you would not be wrong, or would not be very far-fetched to say the Philippines is a matriarchal society in some ways, in some respects, but at least in some families. But women stayed home and men came to the U.S. In fact, I remember being in Widener Library because when I took a course in Filipino immigration, it actually was a course on Asia with a subsection on the Philippines. And the section leader said, oh, yeah, go ahead. You could do something on immigration. Of course, there were no books on immigration. And I had to go deep into the stacks at Widener Library to find the unpublished theses, or at least they were bound copies, by, I presume to be somewhat wealthy Filipinos who were able to come to study and get their PhDs at Harvard. So it was in the scholarly work that I saw the stats about how men outnumbered women by about 10 or 15 to 1, and how they came to the United States and the Philippines. And, 10 or 15 to 1, great odds for a gay bar, but this was a kind of almost a government-imposed kind of sociobiology in the sense that, well, it was clear they did not want Filipinos to start families. It was clear they did not want Filipinos to stay here after working, or at least to spread their seed here in America. And clearly you can see that sentiment bubble up in the late 20s and 30s in California, where the eugenics movement was centered in Sacramento, in the valley of California, where Filipinos were workers and came and worked and took the women, the white women, because there were no Filipino women. And of course, that was a threat to the white males who didn't have the jobs during the Depression. And now their women were being taken. And that was the cause of Filipinophobia at the time, which resulted in the Tydings-McDuffie Act in 1934, which was the exclusion of Filipinos to the U.S. Now, all this could have been solved if they just included more Filipino women on those boats. But I've seen some rosters, like the roster that my dad came in 1928 with his brother, and you can see the names: male, 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 one female. It was like more than 15, 10 to 15 to 1. It was more like 20 to 1. And that was the reality of the Filipino women. Very few here, but the ones who were here in the United States, well, they were like, they had the pick of the litter, as they say. They were the queens. The women, most other Filipino women stayed home. And it left a lot of the Filipino men as bachelors. But I know that there are some tough women here, because I used to see them in the Filipino communities and the social organizations. You knew that there were some tough cookies in the crowd, and they knew it. My ninang, I had a ninang who was, my mom was not she was not the strongest outwardly, but she hung out with her comadres who, because they were younger in a lot of ways, because my mom didn't come in my dad's group in the 20s. My mom actually came in the 40s after World War II. And this is when most of the Filipino women came. And I remember my mom, and because I would see these women in the Filipino social organizations, like the Lawagueños. My father was from Lawag, so he was part of the Lawagueños. And there were some really tough women. And fortunately, they were my ninangs. So, they knew how to deal with the men and deal with us little kids. But so the men were generally older, from the 20s. They immigrated in the 20s and the 30s, and the women were younger because they came in the 40s. My mom wasn't one of the tough ones outwardly, but she was one of the tough ones when you considered that she was from the worst part of Manila, from Tondo. She was proud of being from there, and when I was a little kid and would sort of joke about it, about the Philippines, she'd always say, "Well, what do you think? You think we live in huts?" I know sometimes my mom and my dad's accents sound the same, but my mom was Tagala and my father was Ilocano, so that makes me a mestizo. Or she'd say, "Sus, Mariosep, sus, sus." It took me a while. I had to write that down when I transcribed it. Sus Mar Yosef was Jesus, Mary, Joseph. Or she had other favorite words. Punyeta ka! Punyeta ka! Bastos! And then she had that, and the high pitch. These are the loving phrases of my mom. She understood. She understood things, and she knew how to communicate with me. But this is the thing about my mom. My mom was the quiet one. She was under 5 feet. She was the quiet one, but she knew when to take control. She knew when to be tough. And when I thought about it, when I got into the history, you had to be tough to survive World War II in the Philippines. I mean, she worked in a dress shop as a kid and had to hide during the Japanese occupation because the Japanese are not very nice when they're in the Philippines. And, when I realized that part of the history, her personal history. I understood why when I was in my 20s and wanted to take my mom to dinner, she wasn't really fond of going to Japantown and sitting down for some sushi. It just always made her feel a little funny. And she got over it, but I remember that first time we went to a little sushi place. I can tell maybe that was a little bit of post-traumatic stress. So my mom was a tough one, really. But, of course, my memories are about her as, the mom of the little boy. And I guess she was proud of me when I was a little kid. She took me to these photographic competitions where we would enter to have a picture taken, and she would have my picture taken, and we won a contest. And at one store, they had a contest. I don't quite remember it because I was, a little kid. But I remember they took a picture and the picture won, and they gave me a crown. And they took a picture of me in the crown, and they called me King of Downtown San Francisco. I was the king of downtown San Francisco. And my mom was proud of it. And although they kind of knew it was not really like, they gave me a cape and a little crown. But they knew it wasn't real because they laughed. I remember them laughing. I said, well, why are you laughing at the king? But, they knew to be more jocular about it than I was. I think I was even younger. I must have been like 4 or 5. Because I kind of took it seriously, because I that's the age when you believe in like dinosaurs and stuff like that. So me being king of downtown San Francisco, totally plausible. Totally plausible. So my mom would have these other Filipino women girlfriends. Because that's the way it was back then in the Filipino community. There were so few Filipinos here, remnants of the 20s, or people came after the 40s, after the war, that if you saw a Filipino, you just saw them and you just instantly glommed onto them and you made them family. And you called them comadre, compadre. Or I remember you could just walk down the street and people were your friends or they became members of your extended family. In fact, the way my mom met my dad was my dad went shopping in the Fillmore and he saw this one woman and she had a baby. It was my Auntie Joy, and my dad helped her carry groceries back to the apartment where Auntie Joy was with my friends of my mom. And my mom and Auntie Joy were good friends, and there was this nice man who carried groceries back, this lonely Filipino guy trying to do good by helping a pregnant or a woman with a small child. And that's part of the story about how my mom and dad met. The Comadre Network. It was a strong one. And there was a group of comadres. My Ninang Laring, my sister's Ninang Nomi, my Auntie Nomi, my Auntie Joy, and my mom. They were like a quartet of comadres who looked out for each other. I remember all of them on Mom's Day. Yeah, my mom. My mom was so gentle, and yet she had this sternness. I mean, when she say, "Punyeta ka! Punyeta ka!" Oh man, don't get to puñeta. God, that's like DEFCON 3. That's not good. But she was so gentle and loving. She cooked for me. She knew my favorite foods. I used to eat a lot of tapa. I mean, don't tell my vegetarian wife. But tapa. That's what was tapa. It was just like overcooked dried meat that they put in the oven after they, you know, fry it till it's like burnt, and they put it in the oven, and then you serve it over rice, and you think, oh my God, this is Filipino soul food. Tapa. Forget the longanisa. Oh, the longanisa was good too. But the tapa. I now have seitan tapa. Yeah. But my mom would do that for me. And then, she would do the little things that mothers do. Like, you're ready to have your little, thing. And we never called it a bathroom. We called it Mrs. Murphy. You go to Mrs. Murphy now? Because for some reason, I don't know why, they lived in an apartment or a flat where there were a lot of Irish in the South of Market for a while. And they got in the habit of calling the water closet, the toilet, Mrs. Murphy, because it was just much nicer to say, Mrs. Murphy, I'm going to Mrs. Murphy now. That was better than calling it the toilet. Even now, saying toilet is odd to me. I'd rather say, I'm going to Mrs. Murphy. So whenever I went to Mrs. Murphy, and it was a very serious thing, I needed Mom's assistance. And there was Mom, of course, to assist. And I'd just lay out a cry. Mommy, I need you. Oh, what did you say? Mommy, I need you. It was like music. It was like the call of the wild. Mommy, I need you. And every now and then, I hear that sound, and it just gets me. I remember it. I remember the feelings. I remember sitting there on my throne, and my mom would come. She'd help me. I'd spare you the details. But it was that continuing connection with my mom. She was there to help. She was always there to help. And after she responded to the call, I could stand up and, just be regular again because, my mom came to my help, to my aid. It was, I wasn't thinking about this last week or a month ago or a year ago. But every now and then I think back and I go deep into my memory files. What are the things that attach me to my mom and that make me remember her? Oh, it was that call and response. It was that, Mommy, I need you. In that key. Mommy, I need you. I'm not a good singer, but that key, I remember that. It wasn't accented. It was just like that. And she would show up. That was my mom. And when she didn't come, oh no. Mom, where are you? Oh, she was probably in the kitchen. The sound of the oil and the grease on the frying pan making too loud a noise. She couldn't hear my cry for her, but it was there. And she'd come and take care of me. That's Mom. That's Mom. You know, my mom was, she, you know how you have dogs and, you love dogs unconditionally because they love you unconditionally. And they come up to you and they just immediately go down on their backs and say, "Oh, rub my tummy. You can have anything you want." My mom was sort of like that a lot of ways. She would just be, um, while she was tough, she had this sense of, well, look, I'm going to be nice. I'm going to not sacrifice, but I'm going to be subordinate. I'll do what you want. And that was kind of her way of being. And maybe that was because she grew up, during the occupation, World War II. Maybe because she had to hide a lot when she was a young girl. But when she had her first heart attack, it's like it was enough to just sort of hang in there, and she became kind of a shut in. And so my images of my mom as she was in her 50s and later was that of a woman who was happy just to be with her family, to stay at home praying, very religious, but also she she was scared to venture out. She was happy just to just sit in her room and watch television. She loved MacGyver. Can you believe she loved MacGyver? And I'd say, if my mom loved MacGyver so much, she'd figure out a way to get herself outside and do something and break out of whatever rut she was in. And I remember when I came back to live in San Francisco, I would take her out, and it's like in my car, and it was like one of the first times she'd ever been out in a car because my family didn't have a car. We were always bus people. We were renters and bus people in San Francisco. And my mom I remember when I took her out, she would love it. And then I'd bring her back to where she was and she'd watch MacGyver. And then she lived with me for a while and it was great. She lived in we had a little place that could be her own, and that was great. But when we moved out to the suburbs, she didn't want to move out there with us because she said all her doctors, all her support, all her friends were in the city, and so she didn't want to live in another county. Yeah, my mom. So I'm talking about my mom, and I said I wanted to finish off with an essay I read, or an essay I wrote rather. It was May 10th, 1996. It was in my book Amok, which was published in 2000. So I took essentially what I thought were the best essays of the late 90s. I started writing the column January 1st, 1995, I believe it was. 95, yeah. And that's when Emil Amok in AsianWeek was born. And I wrote this in 1996, so about a year and a few months later. It's called Mom's Sunday, when my favorite resident alien turned citizen. We were eating ice cream at Blum's, the now defunct San Francisco shrine to the sweet tooth. Just me and my mom, or in homeboy speak, using the pop grammar of endearment, me and my mom's. There was only one of her, but she was definitely in possession of something. Citizenship. That's why we were celebrating with traditional American food of the high-cal, high-fat nature. Forget apple pie. This was an ice cream sundae to end all ice cream sundaes, double scooped, a massive squiggle of whipped cream, chocolate syrup with a cherry on top. Mom was an American, at last. I'll never forget that scene. It's my Norman Rockwell moment. That was more than 10 years ago. Significant because Mom was in her 70s, a widow and a resident alien. As a kid, I always thought that was funny because it reminded me of my then favorite TV show, My Favorite Martian. Whenever I saw that, I thought of Mom, my favorite resident alien. She wasn't Donna Reed or Lucy. She was Ray Walston. Aliens had special status back then when green cards were really green. They could do just about anything citizens could do, but anything we needed to do. Shop, take the bus. And they won't arrest me, she'd say. And we'd laugh, except during those times when she didn't let me have my way, and I wish they'd knock on our door and send her back. Why shouldn't I stay up late? I may have been 7 at the time, but at least I was a citizen. I always lost those power plays. Mom's domain was the home, and it trumped democracy. I always thought she was just fine as your common, everyday garden variety green card holder. Everyone was nice to her. No one looked down on her. No one made fun of her, except for my dad. My dad would joke, using his best Filipino accent, that Mom wasn't a citizen. Oh, he was a citizen. He came from the Philippines in the 1920s. And he wore his citizenship like a set of suspenders, especially on election day. He'd go out and vote the way the Cooks Union told him, and Mom just figured it was the family vote. She stayed at home and took care of me and my sister. That's what she was used to. Being an alien was all right by her. So you can imagine my surprise when she declared to my sister and me that she was taking her oath. I'm taking my oath. She would renounce her place of birth, the Philippines, and finally accept America as her home. Mom, you've been an alien almost 40 years, I said. Yeah, and Reagan's been president for 3. Reagan's been president for 3? Yeah. My father just died, just as Reagan took office. It left my mom on a widow's pension, Social Security. My mom was hardly one of Reagan's welfare queens. She lived frugally and qualified for the free food programs that provided chunks of cheese the size of ottomans. No one could eat cheese fast enough. Clearly, the good times were over. Reagan cut taxes, stripped spending, installed his trickle-down theories. But Mom knew nothing would trickle down to her. Citizenship was the only way to fight against any further erosion. I have to vote now, she told me. It turned out, after all these years, my mom had Susan B. Anthony's spirit after all. The only thing to trickle down to Mom was a politicized anger and a wicked sense for John Hinckley as hero jokes. Nothing like a John Hinckley joke to make you appreciate the First Amendment. As we approach Mother's Day, I've got to hand it to my mom. She had the vision. She knew something was happening back then. She knew better than the McLaughlin Group. There was trouble ahead. She took action. She now collects her Social Security with pride in the name of FDR, my father, and all that's good about America. It's barely enough to get by. Today, I'm seeing my mom's motivation replicated en masse by the hundreds who are rushing to become citizens. I walked down to the INS offices in San Francisco and couldn't believe the busloads of people lined up just to get through the revolving glass door before it shuts. Since my mom became an American, she's slowed down considerably. So has Reagan. But Congress hasn't. Last week's Senate vote on welfare cuts for non-citizens was a milestone in immigrant history. It marked the formalization of this new era of scapegoating, one that we've come to expect over the last few years. The bill not only targets illegal immigrants, but also targets legal immigrants, green card holders, resident aliens, people who receive public assistance. Few will speak out for illegal immigrants these days. Illegal is illegal, right? But how moral is taking away benefits from legal residents of this country who are needy for reasons of age or disability? I'd hate to think about my mother's medical bills these last few years if she were not eligible for all the state and federal aid. Thank God my mom's a citizen. She can get sick all she wants. She might even get sick from this legislation. These mean-spirited cutbacks are driven by the idea that legal immigrants cost more in government benefits than they pay in taxes. But keep in mind only about 5% of working-age legal immigrants receive public assistance. Immigrants aren't bankrupting our country. Legislators are bankrupt ethically to deny aid to legal residents, specifically resident aliens. America has always been about we, the people, not we, the citizens. My mom knows that. She read it in the Constitution. May 10th, 1996. It's funny, as I read that, I always said that doing a collection of essays, even though they were intended for newsprint, had some place in the ongoing literature of Asian America, Filipino America, Asian American history, because they're snapshots of what was being said, what was felt at the time. That was 1996, 21 years ago. And look how not so far we've progressed. That was Mom's Sunday from my book, Amok. And that's the special Sunday Mother's Day program. Hey, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to continue dry. We're on iTunes because it's not very dry in here now. We're on iTunes. Please subscribe, rate, and review. Tell your friends about the show. Share a link. You can contact me on Twitter at Emil Amok. That's EMILAMOK. Or go to the ALDEF blog at www.aldef.org/blog. And give us your feedback on www.amok.com. You can even leave a message on SpeakPipe. You don't need a phone. It's all, if it's audible, we'll use it. Just talk into your computer, and we'll use it just like in talk radio. If you like what we do, share a link. Tell a friend. Go to the ALDEF blog and hit the donate button if you're so moved. That's at www.aldef.org/blog. ALDEF is a 501c3, and your help is tax deductible. Once again, thanks for listening to this special Mother's Day edition of Emil Amok's Takeout. I'm Emil Guillermo.